And we're live. We're here. Hello, internets. Today on Retail Therapy, I am your host, Greg Burke, along with my co-host, as usual, Rod. How you doing, Rod?
I'm doing really well. I'm very excited for today's episodes. I think it fits the theme. You know what time of year it is, but I'll let you take it away. I'm excited nonetheless.
All Hallows Eve. That's the theme, right? At least I think it is.
I think so too.
Yeah, we actually have a special guest. You've seen him on the unboxing videos. He's my friend, and the leader of the NorCal Ghostbusters is Chris Nance.
Oh, internet.
So we have a very special show today. We're going to talk about Ghost and Ghost Busting, the franchises, the history, all that good stuff. And I know, Rod, you had a ton of questions for us specifically about this. It is a hobby, which is interesting. It is definitely a hobby. Well, first off, I want to have Chris to talk about a little bit about who he is and what the NorCal Ghostbusters is all about.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Chris Nance. I'm the founder, original. I think the title I always give myself is experimental equipment technician because I build stuff. But I'm the very first and founding member of Northern California Ghostbusters, which is, I think, right now actually the northernmost fan franchise in California.
Wow.
Yeah, we kind of span quite a bit of distance here. Mostly the fan franchise, NorCal Ghostbusters, just like all the other fan franchises, are mostly an excuse for all of us super nerds to get together and build stuff together and go to events and show up together and work together and kind of get to know each other and just kind of like explore the hobby together. The other thing that tends to happen with the fan franchises, and it's something that we've been working on quite a bit, is they also work for a lot of charitable foundations. They do a lot of great work just raising money for charities all over the world, including some of our friends like down in Sacramento Ghostbusters. You may have seen a few years ago. They helped the Make-A-Wish Foundation fulfill a boy's big dream of being a Ghostbuster for a day. Took over Old Town Sacramento, the whole 9 yards. It's really pretty incredible stuff once you kind of start to get down the rabbit hole.
And then Rod, you had some questions for us specifically because there's a lot of stuff we can talk about the show, like proton packs and the gadgets and the stuff that we build and buy and modulate. But you had some questions for us, I believe.
Well, so I did a little bit of research, of course, and by a little bit, I mean I did a pretty thorough amount of research on our guests, and the whole building process is very fascinating to me. As I used to be a teacher, and when it came to like teaching kids, every type of student learns differently. Some learn like hands-on, some can just kind of sit and listen and retain information. Me personally, I was one of those kids where I just wanted to get my hands as dirty as possible and just try to build stuff. And I wanted to know, like, where does your process come in some of the, I'm saying inventions, but that you build? Because I mean, do you like look at a picture on Google and say, okay, I'm going to do that? Or are you more so like, I'm just going to conceptualize it from the brain and bring it out? Like, how do you do it?
So as far as the props go, it really depends on the prop, really, really, really. When it's something like I'm trying to replicate a prop that was used on screen in a film, I am going to a couple of different websites. gbfans.com is usually my first go-to. The other one that I've been using an awful lot lately is the Ghostbusters Reference Library.com. Both websites have just an incredible amount of reference material, just pictures of all the different props from all the different angles, being used in the movie, being used, not being used in the movie, actually at the prop warehouse at Sony after the fact with micrometers and tape measures and everything you could imagine to take measurements. So when I'm replicating something that's already been done before, I tend to go online and I'll just start looking at what other people have done. That's usually, I always, people are always amazed by my proton pack, but I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for how much information was out there and available on gbfans.com. As far as actually fabricating stuff goes, in the case of like the proton pack, there's not a lot on here that I actually fabricated completely myself. For the most part, this is all stuff that I actually bought directly from other fans or from very particular sources like the little clip art pneumatic control valve on the pack here. That's a real clip art pneumatic control valve. You can still get them from clipart.com for $40. They're still totally available, and it's the exact same thing that they used in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
But in some cases, it's a little bit harder or a little bit easier, actually. So, for example, my trap is a good example of something that's a little bit easier. This actually was sold to me as a fully 3D printed kit. I actually, oh, hey, there we go. Equipment malfunction already. This was sold to me as a complete kit, basically. And then I went through and I sourced all of these little real resistors and knobs and stuff myself, and this little ITT relay. It's a very ancient piece of technology. So there's this. It really depends on the individual prop itself. If there is a bunch of resources out there already, I'm gonna use them because they're there. There's no point in me trying to reinvent the wheel, right?
That's right.
When it's a different, in other cases though, there's stuff that I've had to fabricate wholesale. There's projects that I'm working on that are, wholly 3D printed, and all of this is just working from a set of files that I picked up from Ghostbusters gear. Greg and I have talked to Nate on live stream before. He's a great guy. He does all this insanely great design stuff, and he puts it all up on his Patreon. That's a great source for 3D print files if you're a 3D printer who's watching.
Now, Rod,
that's amazing.
Now, Rod, how familiar are you with Ghostbusters? Because there's movies, there's cartoons, and comics. Like, what's your wheelhouse of knowledge of the universe?
So I definitely seen the original films. I think I was a little too young for the cartoon. Like, I think it probably had went out of syndication by the time I was old enough to tangibly remember cartoons. But I have gone back and watched like mashups and stuff of it on YouTube for the stuff that can be uploaded because there's still like copyrights on everything. Seen the most recent Ghostbusters film as well. Seen the 2016 adaptation, so we definitely got to talk a bit about that as well too. But I guess I wanted to ask you, Chris. In a time, because I know you guys have a little bit more skin in the game than I do. In a time where there's so many different fandoms like coming into fruition, like Pokemon is just right around the corner, and then Star Wars is hitting strong. Marvel, DC. What was it about Ghostbusters that just really locked you down?
Well, so I was born in '87, so I was kind of right between the two films, and obviously I wasn't quite old enough to catch the second one in theater. But even so, as like a child of the '90s, like I grew up with 1 and 2 on VHS, pretty much on repeat in my parents' house. And I was, you might be a little bit young for it. Greg and I actually were both kind of the exact right age for real Ghostbusters, in that early '90s, era to kind of hit us.
Yep.
So as a kid, I just, I loved the cartoons. I loved the movies. When I was like 11, anytime that I had a bad day, I would just go home and put on Ghostbusters 2 because I loved it so much. It was my feel-good movie. So there was a lot of that. And then also, I remember when I was about 12, 13, I ran across this website that is not exact. It still exists. You can still go to the web address. You'll still find a website. Chris Stewart still runs protoncharging.com.
Is it GeoCities?
No, it's Proton Charging. Thank you. But there was this website all dedicated to Ghostbusters, and he had all of these great links to all of these sound files and video clips and links to all these fan franchises. I had no clue that there were fan franchises until I was like that age and started going out on the internet and being like, oh, there's an Alaska Ghostbusters, there's an Indiana Ghostbusters, there's a, what? And then seeing all these fans, seeing these fans who are dressing up and building their own proton packs. And that was the big thing for me, was the proton pack. I got absolutely obsessed with the proton pack when I was that age, 12, 13-ish. And I remember I started to build one out of like old housing insulation and stuff in my dad's garage. Never went anywhere. Eventually gave up. But that dream kind of stuck with me for a really long time. So by the time 2016 came about and the reboot was happening, I got really hyped up about the reboot. It caught me, and it was like, hey, wait a second, I've got a pretty good shop now. How much does it cost to actually build one of these things? And that's when I found gbfans.com, and here we are.
Yo, that's awesome, man. I mean, when you're a part of any sort of fandom, I think there's a key element that a lot of people in this current day and age forget about, and that is like the sense of community. Because like, for instance, I like collecting like cards and comics. As cool as that is, like the overall thing to it is you want to find and meet other people who are into the same things that you're into, so you guys can learn from one another. Because like there's so much that I thought I knew like about the fandoms I was into coming into retail therapy that Blake and Greg and Danny and everybody else that we've had on the show have like opened my entire world to. So, yo, dude, your creations are awesome, yo. Keep doing that.
Thanks, Rod.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like Chris already said, like we were just the right age group, and it's funny too because movies in that mid '80s, late '80s, like Ghostbusters wasn't meant to be a kids film, just like RoboCop wasn't meant to be a kids film, and it ends up being like they end up making toys and like cartoon shows of this like RoboCop especially is a great example because that's not a kids movie at all. Like, but they had like toys you could buy for kids, and you're like, this is a violent movie. Why are kids buying toys? I don't know. It was just different time period, I guess. Just a weird timing on that front.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters 2, they definitely Ghostbusters 2, which was filmed 5 years after the original Ghostbusters, definitely was geared more toward younger audiences. I'd say like there were definitely a little less more adult jokes. They had a little bit more like kiddish fun with it, which is why Chris
Mm,
probably put it on the time because the first one is definitely meant, I think, for older audiences or was originally intended for older audiences.
hmm
Oh, you know what it was, Greg? Ghostbusters 2 has more actual scenes of ghost busting in it.
Okay, that's the big one.
That's
But
kind of like a common trope with like films from like the late '80s and early '90s. Like when I even think of like how Beetlejuice is shot, like the overall premise of the film is it's about this dead dude who needs you to say his name 3 times in a row. But like when you actually compile the screen time of like Beetlejuicing, he's only on screen for like 15 minutes of like an hour and a half film, and it almost I think like the original Ghostbusters kind of gave you like a little bit of that less is more type of mentality. Like you've seen the footage, you've seen the trailers, you know the premise, but before we get to that, we got some storytelling. We got to keep you along the journey before we get to the fun stuff, you know.
And I think Chris will correct me if I'm wrong in this, but like a lot of those things too have to do with budget constraints. It's just really expensive to do visual effects in a film. Like a Marvel movie is a great example. The whole movie's a visual effect, and I don't know if
Mm.
that's because it has a higher budget or it's just easier to do. Probably a combination of both. But like Ghostbusters was a very expensive film to make, and there's really not that many sequences with visual effects in it. There's the Slimer scene. Sorry, go ahead, Chris. You're gonna correct me.
I was actually gonna point out specifically with Ghostbusters 1, it's pretty well documented that they were in time crunch the whole way.
Mm.
Um, they only had like a year from pre-production to release. So like they were rushing through as much as possible. It's what led to there's a lot of little fan known Easter eggs. So like if you go and watch what is it, Cleaning Up the Town, I think one of the special effects guys from Boss Films back in the day, even talks about how like they needed like 5 extra seconds of Slimer floating around the chandelier, but they'd already thrown out the maquette, so they were like, well, somebody grabs a peanut, spray paints it green, and that's like there's like 5 seconds of film footage where if you pay close attention, that's a peanut. That's a peanut that's spray painted green. That's not the maquette. And that's because of time. They didn't have time to do. They
Yeah.
couldn't redo it. And it even when they were even shooting the regular live action sequences with the actors. There's in the montage. There's a scene of them running through that mall, and if you pay attention to the crowd in the background, there's a security guard chasing Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis because they were guerrilla shooting. They weren't supposed to be there. So like I think a big part of it on the first one especially was time constraints more than budget or anything else really.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that too. It's also seemed like too, like in the '80s, especially. I think people like with where pop culture was, everybody was kind of looking for like the next boom. Like these franchises, even as here we are today on Retail Therapy talking about Ghostbusters, I think of like all the cool franchises that came out of the 80s and that are still here, or that even predate the 80s, like again, Star Wars, but like Terminators. They're never going to stop making Terminator. Like, I don't know why. Judgment Day is always going to happen. They're going to keep trying to fix it. They're never going to stop it. But Ghostbusters almost felt like, and I don't want to say they went out on a high note because I think the franchise is very popular, but they didn't want to go down like that. Let's just shoot out a bunch of films and spin-offs and all that. We gave you the less is more thing, and we let it resonate and sit with the community. And I really appreciate that.
It's an aspect that I miss in filmmaking, AAA filmmaking, like big studio filmmaking, because like now you have like phases, like phase
Right.
20 of Marvel, and it's going to continue to go on until those films stop making money, and they'll just keep poking it out. And I think it hurts. It hurts overall structure because nothing's. I've said this on my other show, Pop Culture with Donovan. Nothing's given time to settle before the next thing's in the way. Like at this point, I feel like people see Marvel films just to watch the end credits, and like that's it. You're paid $20 to see what's next, but it's like you're already missing what's happening because you're so busy with what's happening next. That's what was weird thing about the Ghostbusters, right? It was everyone was worried about this film when it released, and it became such a huge hit. They made a cartoon show, but they didn't even make a sequel till 5 years later. And like Chris can probably explain better, like why did it take 5 years between 84 and 89 to make a sequel?
Well, I think there was a little bit. See, it's hard for me to say for sure because I wasn't around then. But I think that it was a much slower roll. The early '80s. So how do I put this? So it's almost like the He-Man marketing phenomenon, if that makes sense. Toy companies started looking for franchises that they could make something toyetic out of, that they could monopolize off of, that they could capitalize off of, that they could kind of build up one of these evergreen property, what we call an evergreen property now.
Mhm.
And that didn't really start until like late 70s, early 80s. And even then, you're still talking about kind of a really slow rollout until you get what was there was something to do with I'm probably going to be completely wrong here. If I recall correctly, there was something to do with the way that FCC marketing rules were relaxed in the mid 80s. And that has a huge amount to do with the change in advertising and marketing in the toy departments, which then influenced kind of everything else. And I think Real Ghostbusters, the cartoon, was kind of right in the middle of that. So it was sort of like the first movie came out, they kind of recognized, oh, we have a franchise here, we could start sort of monopolizing off of, start capitalizing off of this. But we need a cartoon to sell these toys because we need something. We need some way for the kids to see all these different designs of the characters and stuff.
Right.
So it's almost similar to like the He-Man thing, right? Where they kind of came up with the toy first and then created the story to fill in. But in this case, it was more like, oh, well, we have this franchise that we can make toys and cartoons of. How do we start filling this in?
Yeah, and that's a really smart approach too, because like when I think of like the late 70s into the 80s, you have like the age of TV, pop culture, of course, the big boom that was in the 80s with like Michael Jackson's Thriller. Like we had never seen a video that long before. Like Purple Rain, we had never seen a music film quite like that. I mean, there are musical adaptation films, but not done in the likeness of somebody else's music. Everybody was just kind of taking these chances, and I really appreciate that with a lot of the films in the 80s, because like between like Terminator, like Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, I mean, I think some of these franchises really laid the foundation for what pop culture and films are supposed to look like.
It's like all this IP was created, and like it's stronger than ever now. But like Chris said, like Transformers was the same way. It was a toy first, and then they did the show because GoBots was a thing, and then I think they were like, someone was like, we can do this better, and they did it better, and they ended up selling a crap ton of toys because of it. And then it became, but Transformers is a bad example because there were so many seasons and so many different. That's why they killed everyone in the movie. Because I mean, remember the Transformers movie, kids were like so traumatized because they needed new robots to sell to kids, so they needed to destroy like the original cast. So like everyone died. Optimus died and came back, and then what's it now? Hot Rod became the new Optimus Prime, and they killed Cliff Jumper and a bunch of other ones, and Ironhide. Like they're just murdering robots left and right. Similar to how you see like a drama when they need to reset the cast, there's usually like some kind of cataclysmic event where everyone dies, and they're like, "Here's the new cast now," because everyone died because the meteor hit the Earth or whatever. It's interesting.
Gary Gygax approach to storytelling. Rocks fall, everyone dies.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Here are your new heroes, your new heroines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like that. So I wanted to ask you guys about that. On the topic of like rebooting and changing things. So of course, we have the first two Ghostbusters films. Everybody loves them, and then 2016 rolls around and we get a bit of a reboot. Now, my first thought, and again, Greg is probably gonna hate me for this, but this is the Marvel like chip in my brain that has been firmly implanted since 2008 with Iron Man. I'm like, oh, are they about to do what I think they're about to do? Are we about to do a big spooky ass universe? Because I'm kind of here for this. But then no, it was just a reboot and like featuring Chris Hemsworth with, dancing in his shirt off and stuff. And then they did another one. So I'm like, is this maybe what they're leaning towards? Or are they just trying to gauge the audience to see their response to new Ghostbuster stuff?
I mean, Paul Feig wanted to do like a whole cinematic universe. Like this movie was supposed to be very, very, very big. It had a bunch of like at the time very popular comedic actors that were all good on SNL. They're all funny in their own right. Like what could go wrong? And people will argue this to the death of the day. Chris loves the movie. I hate the movie. It like divided the fan base right down the middle, which was really weird. It's what the Last Jedi did it for the Star Wars fan base. Like it was half people hated it, half people loved it. So it was very divisive.
Well, and to be clear too, I actually really loved it for very specific reasons that have nothing to do with the actual movie itself, really. There's a lot of aspects of it that I really enjoyed, but there's also stuff that I was not that big of a fan of, and I don't think the critique is unfounded. I think there is a lot of unfounded critique that gets thrown at it of people just kind of getting all bent out of shape for over dumb stuff, but there is, some real critique to throw at that movie. It's hard to like watch the Red Letter Media review of it and not kind of agree with a lot of the points that they make.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because Ghostbusters has had a much different journey than other IP in the 80s. I mean, like Transformers has been relevant since the 80s, like in terms of toys or spin-off cartoons or low-budget cartoons. After the 90s, after the early 90s, Real Ghostbusters got out of syndication and it kind of disappeared for a while, and you got Extreme Ghostbusters for a little bit, but that was really it. Like there was nothing after that show, and it always had its fandom, but I don't think it was on the same scale as like Transformers or what other things that came out in the 80s that's still relevant today. Transformers is like the biggest one that I'm picking up. Or like early video games like Sonic or Mario. Like the Ghostbusters didn't have the same staying power as those things. And I think the big deal about it coming in 2016 is it had been like, I want to say 20 years, Chris? Like since we'd gotten like some new type of Ghostbusters meeting that wasn't like a fan thing, like, because Extreme Ghostbusters was the last official, I think Extreme Ghostbusters was the last official media that came out that was involved in the Ghostbusters universe. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
So FanFest was 2019, and that would have been 35 years. So 2016 would have been 32 years since release.
But I'm saying in terms of since Extreme Ghostbusters aired to where between that and the 2016 reboot, like what was that? Like what was there?
Nothing. There were rumors. There were rumors, pretty much. That was it. You might recall, Greg, there was a real long period there, and I kind of touched on this earlier when I was talking about like my background with getting started building the Proton Pack. There was a really long period there where it was like there's like 3 or 4 big Ghostbusters, fan websites, and you would get rumors about a Ghostbusters 3, Ghostbusters Hellbent, right? That floated around for like a good 10, 15 years or something like that, regardless of Extreme Ghostbusters. And it was just something that Dan Aykroyd always talked about, would always bring up in interviews, but nothing ever happened with it.
They wrote a script, like him and Hale Ramis wrote like a story treatment, and the whole thing revolved around Bill Murray saying yes, but the problem is Bill Murray was being a stick in the mud at the time, and it was like, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to do Ghostbusters. I'm over it. And it's funny because if you follow that, because people are crazy about the Lost Ghostbusters 3 script that supposedly is fully written and like ready to go. You get a lot of that in the 2009 game. No, not 2000. Yes. Yeah, you get a lot of that in the 2009 game, which was also written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. So like you kind of got like a sneak peek of what the third movie could have been. Because the third movie, I think at one point they were like messing around with like Oscar being a Ghostbuster for some reason. Like that was something he threw out like as an idea at one point. Like it got really weird. Oscar's the baby in Ghostbusters 2, Rod, if you don't remember that. He was a little baby.
So is the Ghostbusters game like, I know they kind of borrowed elements from what would have been like that skeleton script. I guess it's not even skeleton, like it's fully written according to the rumors. Could you maybe look at the game as like, is it canon like how the Matrix game is? Or
It is. It's supposed to be canon. It is.
Okay.
For a long
Because I
time.
was reading, I was like, it felt like I'm picking up that's supposed to be canon.
Yeah. Between 2009 when it was released and last year when Afterlife came out, it was considered fully canon. I think Afterlife kind of invalidated it because they kind of imply that they shut down after the events of 2.
But they don't say they don't say when though. That's the key thing. They don't say when they shut down. So it could have been like 15 years after 2. Like you're not given dates.
True, and I think actually, interestingly enough, since we're bringing this up, we're talking about the possibility of Afterlife crossing over with the video game. Now, Greg, Rod, are you familiar with these? The Hasbro Spangler Neutrona wands?
Yes, I think so. Keep talking. It's starting to come back.
Let me go ahead and flip this sucker on real quick. So one of the key features on this wand, it's kind of cool. That really stood out to me when they first. Let me turn the volume down. Really stood out to me when they first released it. Is it's got shoots a proton stream effect, right?
But it also has
effect.
Oh.
That's the sound effect from the video game that they used for the slime blower pack.
Did they really sample the video game for that?
Yeah.
That's the stasis stream from the video game. There's the Meson collider from this video game.
Like all the different weapons in the game were in this toy, which was even validated it further.
Oh, that's awesome.
So while we have no official movie appreciation of the video game, it seems like somebody's aware.
And like the cardinal rule of thumb is, again, Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, is that like Dan Aykroyd is kind of the whole mind behind this whole thing, and he's called Uncle Dan in the circles, we call him Uncle Dan. If he validates it, like his world is law. Like if he's like, yeah, that's canon, then you just take it. And some of the times he'll make up stuff or correct people. Most of the time, like people shove stuff in his face, he goes, yeah, that sounds right, and he gives him the thumbs up, and then boom, you get the canon sticker. That's basically how that works.
Yeah. Uncle Dan has become the George Lucas of the franchise at this point, where it's all final decisions come down to him as to whether or not it matters.
And he's a great sport about it too. Like I've only met him once, but like even Chris will tell you that like when people dress up, he calls people cadet. Like he has a lot of fun with this movie that he created, 33 years ago,
He loves it. When I attended FanFest back in 2019, I had a brief crossing of paths with Dan, and he looked exhausted. He'd been up on his feet all damn day and running around and taking pictures and talking to people, and he still had the energy. He cut in line right in front of me, or he passed through me, passed through the line right in front of me, and he still had the energy to look at me, nod, make eye contact, nod, go, looking good, cadet, and keep moving. Like that's Dan in a nutshell. Like that, he loves the franchise so much that, he's part of it. Like it's part of him. It's part of his life. He's never gonna really divorce himself from it, I don't think. Probably a lot of that has to do with like his own family background and like spiritualism and stuff like that.
Yep.
Really fascinating guy to listen to interviews on. Yeah.
The really cool thing too nowadays is that Ernie Hudson is finally getting like more recognition in the series because, right, I don't know if you knew this, but like originally when Dan Aykroyd and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis wrote the script for Ghostbusters, like they wanted to cast a POC because they wanted diversity in the film because it was something that just didn't exist in the 80s. Like there was no diversity. So they wrote Ernie Hudson this huge role in the movie. Like he's in the movie like as much as the other ones are. And when the day Ernie Hudson shows up, the
original script.
And then when he shows up, everything had been rewritten, and then like he doesn't even show up to the last 20 minutes of the movie, and he was pretty pissed about it. And he should be. Like he had this huge role and it got smacked down, but that's what's really fun about Firehouse is that he's supposed to play a major role there, And because we haven't really seen a lot of Winston outside of the cartoon, and they can mostly he has a bigger role too. But yeah, it was cool to have that kind of hindsight in 1984. You know.
Hmm.
And there's a great piece of extra interview footage from I think the early '90s with Harold Ramis, where he actually addresses that very specifically. You just reminded me of this, Greg. And it's one of my favorite Harold Ramis quotes. Because when you have the opportunity to make a positive message about diversity, why not? Like, and that was it. That's the original, one of the original authors of the script. So it's like, yeah, representation and diversity, as much people want to bitch about it, Answer the Call in 2016, oh, they just made it all women, blah, 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 blah. It's part of the DNA of the franchise, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually a really good point because again, when I think back to a lot of the franchises that came out of that era, like you got Terminator 1 and 2 back to back, like boom, boom, just back to back ish rather, and then you got 3, which was like basically a parody of 2, 4, which was supposed to be the glimpse into the future, and so on and so forth. And they're basically ruining this franchise. I think with Ghostbusters, people hold on to it a little bit more for good reasons, and also like what we've seen with the response from the 2016 film for the bad reasons, because there's only just the two, and it's like, boom, mic drop. Okay, cool. Now the fandom is like, okay, we got to hold on to this for dear life. This is an awesome, piece of cinema here. Both films, the TV show, we're gonna just hold it until these guys are old and gray. And then 2016 rolls around and it's like, hey, a new generation of people need to learn about Ghostbusters, and the fandom is like, hey, they do, but who are these people and why are they all women? And it's like, seen the film. I thought it was a pretty goddamn good film. I mean, I still think the original films were funnier, even funnier than the most recent installment, but I think there's something to gain from all the installments. Like, and I just didn't understand the backlash other than just angry nerds, basically. And I get it. I'm a nerd that gets angry at stuff at times, but not for those reasons.
Yeah, and some of it unfortunately comes back to gatekeeping. As any like long-term fandom, especially I've noticed it seems to exist especially in the costuming fandoms. So a good example is the 501st. Everybody knows about the 501st. Stormtroopers all over the place, blah blah blah. If you're not super duper familiar with the 501st, though, you don't necessarily know how extreme they are about their costuming standards.
Mm-hmm.
If you have even an eighth of an inch extra flashing trimmed off of a particular piece of your armor, and it's not supposed to be trimmed that short, you're out. That's it. You're done. You don't get to do 501st events in that armor.
Wow.
Yeah, they're very, very hardcore. And some of that is because they work directly with Disney, or with Lucasfilm, and Disney now. And it's led them to some really cool opportunities, like when Mandalorian Season 1 was being filmed, a lot of those Stormtroopers were 501st members because they already had the armor. They were already screen accurate. They could just throw them right on screen and not have to worry about anything, except maybe putting some dust on the armor or something. The Ghostbusters fandom is we have elements kind of.
We're more lax. There's still rules, but we're much laxer. Chris will tell you, like, we have a minimum, which is I think a jumpsuit, a patch, and a name tag, and that's it, right?
Well, so it depends on the franchise. 501st is hardcore and intense like that because they are organized. All of the different subgroups that are all regional are all part of an overarching organization, and that overarching organization is what creates all of that like bureaucracy essentially. With Ghostbuster fan franchises, we don't have that. The closest that we've ever gotten is Ghost Corps, which is the production studio at Sony that handles the franchise. Ghost Corps does not really have any requirements other than is there more than one person? Do you have a name? Do you have what are your basic like details? All right, you're in. Like that's it. And admittedly, they got a lot of demand for that. I think a lot more demand than they expected, and they stopped doing that sign-up program pretty quickly. But that's the closest that we've ever gotten to anything like an organization. And if you weren't around in 2016 when they were starting to do that kind of sign-up, you're just not on the list.
So you know what's funny? This reminds me of so in Smash, like we all know Super Smash Bros. Melee is like the big one, right? But they have what's called the pre-doc babies and the post-doc babies. So like the pre-doc babies are like the people who were in the community before the big documentary came out, and then post-doc is like is 2016 almost like a kind of a cultural generational turning point for the culture as well as like here's the pre-16ers, post-16ers, or is it just everybody's all in?
I think at first it was a little bit more divisive. It still is. You really can't mention ATC on the Ghostbusters subreddit without some jackass coming along saying, "Oh, you're a dick because you like a movie," uh, which is pretty stupid. Uh, but more so and more so, I think, after Afterlife, the community has kind of broken that divide down. I was kind of touching on this before. There are some gatekeeping elements to the community that have kind of been there all along, but it's kind of one of those things where, in my opinion, from what I've been able to see from my involvement, it started as a wall and it's been getting eroded. It hasn't been built up. Uh, and so like 2016 was one of those things that helped erode that wall. It, brought in a lot more female fans, brought in a lot more kid fans, brought in all new equipment designs that I know at least 3 different ghost heads off the top of my head who are not big fans of 2016, but they loved the 2016 Proton Pack so much they absolutely had to build one.
So it's also the, like Chris mentioned, it's the infection vector that's important, right? It's getting a new generation introduced to what a Ghostbuster is, what Ghostbusters as a whole is, and like you got that with 2016, even though it was diverse, complicated, you got that, and then when you had Afterlife, the one that you saw, right? That one also is a great infecting vector for kids because now you're getting toys again, and that just makes a whole new generation of Ghostbusters. Kind of like how there's a new generation of Smash Brothers players every single time there's a new edition, right? You have your Melee players, you have your N64 players, you have your GameCube players, and you have your Wii and your Nintendo Switch players.
Yeah, 100%. And it actually makes sense too. Like when I think of it from a marketing standpoint, I think this is one aspect that when we do retail therapy, I'm glad that like we're all, very big fans of where it is that we come from, and we all kind of meet in the middle on how important marketing is, especially when you're trying to introduce a new generation of people, because a lot of things that may have flown over or under the radar in the 80s, again, Ghostbusters, a very family friendly franchise. Some other franchises don't kind of get the 2022 stamp, that seal of approval. And I think introducing a new generation of Ghostbuster potential fans with an all-female led cast really shows the world like, hey, everybody dies, so everybody turns into a ghost. So any old type of person should be able to bust these ghosts. So let us give you this, and then we'll see how it goes, and we'll go from there.
I couldn't agree more, Rod. That is pretty much exactly how I feel about it. It is just greater and greater infection vectors. Even Greg and I there's a local area Halloween street festival that happens in our little town here, and we did that 2 weeks, and how many parents did we take? We took pictures with their kids, and then the parent was like, "Oh, well, they haven't seen Ghostbusters yet, but they already love it." It's like,
yeah, there
okay,
were surprisingly a lot of kids like under 10 that knew what we were, because like I'm explaining to kids like who Chris Farley is. There's that cause and they don't understand who it is, but like the Ghostbusters thing is starting to ramp up with all the stuff that they're making. It's really hard to stay with something when there's nothing supported about, when there's no show on, no movie releasing, or no toy line. The no toy line's a big one. Like when there's nothing for you to interact with. Like I'd show my nephew this all day, but if there's no toys in Target or people aren't talking about it at his elementary school, then like it's just gonna be a thing, a thing that we experience that he's not gonna get that same type of reaction to.
You know what? Like now that I'm thinking about it, I see why this cool franchise has withstood the test of time. First and foremost, the fandom, why Chef's Kiss, but then the logoing and the marketing in a time in the 80s where like ghosts in popular culture, I love that. When ghosts in popular culture, like it was only about being as scary and spooky as possible. Like you had Ghostbusters that just reinvented like the entire child's outlook on what ghosts were. And like not only are ghosts friendlier looking. I mean, we still have there. Some of them are bad. Like we can also combat these ghosts too. Like we didn't even have films like that, and I think kids see that and they're like, okay, I don't have to be afraid. Like there is some sort of media out there for me.
There's a great anecdote from late 80s, early 90s about the real Ghostbusters cartoon and how it was a it was a show that a lot of teachers at schools like to encourage the kids to enjoy because it taught the kids to work together to fight fears, and it wasn't about creating teams that were fighting against each other. It wasn't like Cops and Robbers where you had a bad guy that you were trying to beat up or anything. The
Mm-hmm.
only real violence was against something that was already dead and was kind of monstrous and kind of a nuisance. You don't want it around anymore. So it was actually kind of like a weirdly bonding, like effective at getting kids to bond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Harold Ramis has gone on record saying that Ghostbusters is really good for kids to play for the reasons Chris just mentioned. It involves teamwork, like no one's the bad guy, you're all working together. It's not necessarily violence. Like you have tools designed to capture the ghost, you're not, but yeah, it's really good for it's a good kid thing to play as a kid. Like no cops and robbers, no cowboy and Indians, like none of that stuff.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. Now, okay, again, the superhero chip in my brain is being activated, but let me ask you guys this. What are your guys' thoughts on a Ghostbusters miniseries? Like 10 episodes, Netflix. Disney doesn't even have to touch this. Like HBO, Netflix, something, and it could still be humorous, but maybe also a little spookier too. Have you guys ever thought of that?
I want to know why Sony hasn't hired Eric Burnham to write it already. Yeah, no, that's an idea that's been floated around for a while now, since I think post 2016. Before he passed, Ivan Reitman had been talking about, from like Answer the Call up to his passing, pretty much. Like, yeah, we want to do a Netflix series where we focus on different franchises around the world telling different stories, and that's like there's so much gold there to work with, because different cultures, different types of ghosts, different types of folklore, different types of history, different groups of people and actors. Like there's a gold mine there.
I mean, it's the same thing. Like, I mean, Seth Rogen has come out, like, because in Hollywood stuff gets canceled and talked about all the time. But Seth Rogen was supposed to be attached to something exactly what you described, Rod. It was a West Coast, like what happens if there was Ghostbusters on the West Coast, that were part of a franchise like Terminex. You know what I mean? Like, how would that work? And Seth Rogen was cast in it, and he started to write something, and then it got canceled before it hit the ground because Sony is really weird about this property in certain situations. And I can't for the life of me figure out why. Like, yeah, the 2016 one was divisive, but even before that, they were weird about it. And like, that's why I'm glad Afterlife made so much money during the pandemic, is because they showed us that there is still a want for a movie like this with these characters like this. And they're finally realizing it now. Like, you're getting the Firehouse. There's a cartoon in the works, like confirmed currently. I mean, we don't know. Of course, we don't know anything about it because they're not going to show anything for years. But like, it's a good thing to get it kind of spark back a life into the franchise that had been dead for a long time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think too, for somebody like myself who, I mean, obviously I grew up with, the popularity of Ghostbusters, maybe not right when it hit, but certainly the aftershock of it. Like, it would be so amazing to just dive deep on either the original cast. I mean, of course, you'd have to tie them into, I would imagine, like a series of some sort, but also some new characters and, be able to maybe explain the technology like a little bit more in detail. And, the same way that they do literally every other franchise on TV, whether it's Marvel or DC or Star Wars or whatever. Like, I think Ghostbusters is one where I'm like, yo, the families would really get in on this. Like, they just did a Hocus Pocus 2, and they do like a Halloween Town every so many years. I'm like, where's my Ghostbusters at? Like, that's all cool, but I want to bust some ghosts. I don't want to go to Halloween Town,
Rod, did you ever?
Right.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was gonna say, I was just agreeing with you, Rod. Like, yeah, I don't want to go live amongst a bunch of monsters in the middle of Halloween Town so much, but if I could strap on a proton pack, that'd be great. Yeah.
Rod, did you ever watch, like, you were prime age for Extreme Ghostbusters, which kind of ran the same year as like Jackie Chan Adventures and Men in Black. It's even done, I think, in the same art style, similar to art style. Like, did you ever watch that as a kid or stumble upon it accidentally?
I may have stumbled on a couple episodes accidentally. I'll be honest. When I was a kid, I was very much against like, okay, I like the films, like film in my brain versus cartoon adaptation. My brain were two very different like parts of like what got my wheels churning. And like a prime example of that would be like, and I know it's not culturally accurate anymore, but I love the first two Mummy films. I think Brandon Fraser's amazing. Love Rachel. I love the entire cast. Super dope. Of course, a lot of cultural inaccuracies looking back on it in retrospect. But the point that I'm making is that when they did the cartoon, I was like, it just doesn't scratch the same itch. I want to know more about these characters, but from almost more of like an adult point of view, which is where like I would love to see Ghostbusters go. I thought the cartoons when I did see them were cool, but I'm like, these people have lives and like children, and children's children at this point. Some of these gentlemen are older now. I would love to dive in on that.
Yeah, The Mummy 2 is specifically interesting because it actually showed you what happens after they get married and have a kid, which was something you really didn't see a lot in films like at the time of sequels. Like it was like, wow, they actually have a kid. He goes on with adventures. And it's cute. But like, yeah, it's the 3 was terrible, but 3, yeah, 2 is interesting in that regard. Like it really was interesting.
Well, and the first couple of Mummy movies kind of still work, especially because it's not like they present themselves as being historically accurate. They present themselves as a campy action movie.
Yep.
It's,
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
But the interesting thing about Extreme Ghostbusters, it was midnight, no, late 90s. It was definitely late 90s because I think I was in.
It was like 98, 97, 98, I think.
Yeah, and it didn't stay on too long, but it was the diversity in that show was so impressive, like for a cartoon. They had someone from South America. They had someone who was in a wheelchair, Garrett, who couldn't walk. They had a POC in there. Like it was really like they kind of covered the gamut, which was actually really interesting to see in the late 90s. Like you barely get that now. It's just starting to become a thing now. And like 20 years ago is like, what? Like you want to have this. It was really cool to see that.
And the design in Extreme Ghostbusters, because the artist that they had doing a lot of the ghost design for that show, holy crap! I would have to look up his name. It's something Barlow. He did a bunch of shows at the time though. I'm struggling to recall some of the other titles that he worked on at that same time period. But like his art style for a lot of those ghost designs kind of made them really fucking creepy, like really kind of spooky designs that are a little unnerving for like that young of an audience. Even to the point of like, I think one of the most infamous episodes of Extreme Ghostbusters is the Deadliners episode, where they very clearly make a plot out of like a pastiche R.L. Stein / Stephen King character and his like very Cenobite-esque sort of horror creations. And that whole episode is freaky. It is real messed up. There's a whole B plot about one of the main characters being kidnapped and then having forcible surgery done to him to modify him into a zombie. Like it's messed up for a kids show. so there's like this degree of like, we can get pretty dark with our storytelling. We can go there. But we still have that thread of comedy that we can pull things back up, and that's something that I think Extreme Ghostbusters did really well, both in terms of design and storytelling. And it harkens back to the original film, where if you watch Ghostbusters from a filmmaking perspective, it is a horror movie that uses comedy to break up the tension. It is not a comedy movie.
That's true.
So so it's in that, it's from that like 80s only genre of horror comedy, like Big Trouble sort of falls in that same sort of genre of being like a horror comedy, not a comedy horror. That would be something like what is it, Scary Movie or something like that, where it's right. We're not really being scary, we're just making fun of the horror elements, as opposed to, there's a lot of cosmic horror going on in the first Ghostbusters, and the only reason why it's funny is because we have these funny characters interacting.
Put these characters in interesting situations. Like that's the thing that we've never seen in the live action version, which is, like Chris said, it's a gold mine. Like they joke about having a franchise being state countrywide, and we never see it like in a live action format or even in an animated format. Like it's just always just New York. and we want to see that, but they're dragging their feet on it, and I don't know why. Sony's dragging their feet on it.
Sony's dragging their feet on a lot of things that they shouldn't be they should be dragging their feet on, especially for people like us who like grew up with a lot of these franchises at the peak of their popularity and then watched it as like, the industry has kind of, I guess for lack of better terms, kind of turned their back on it and just kind of let the fans have at it, and then dropping projects randomly. Like, we're just long overdue. But I guess my question to you guys would be like, with everything that Ghostbusters has done and is still doing, because there's a cartoon in the works, where would you guys like to see it go next?
Oh man, you want to start, Greg?
Yeah, I'll take that. I just want to see, like I said, I want to see more franchises. I want to see like a show or a cartoon that focuses on, I don't know, Ghostbusters from Chicago, or Ghostbusters from, LA, or Ghostbusters from, Seattle. Like, I want to see those stories told because it fits so well. And if you've seen the Extreme Ghostbusters, even any episodes of the real Ghostbusters, that's what it is. It's every episode is a different call that they have to deal with and figure out a way to beat the ghost, because it's not always just blasting it and trapping it. Sometimes they have to figure out something else. There's one episode where they go on a game show, like a ghost tricks them on a game show and tries to kill them on a game show. There's so much room for that there, and they've just never really did it. And I was really hoping they'd do that in Afterlife, and they didn't. They keep going for the route of like they go under. And Extreme Ghostbusters did that, and Afterlife did that. Oh, we went under. We went out of business. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, come on, why can't we expand on this idea? That's what I'd really like to see it go. I'm hoping that's the direction it will go.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of touches on something of it. So Afterlife kind of establishes to some extent that there's really no major ghost problem if there's not some kind of major end of the world scenario happening to cause it. Which is not something that I like as a setting detail. I kind of prefer that there is some kind of low level reason for the Ghostbusters to exist continuously. And then maybe they have problems, running the business and making it work and all that. But they should be able to catch ghosts. That's like the core of the storytelling, right? If we take that away from them, we kind of hamstring the actual storytelling that you can do. Because all of a sudden, instead of like, oh, some big crazy encounter event happened that shut all this stuff down or caused so much damage that we couldn't pay for it or whatever, like, business dried up and we just kind of shut doors. Just like, well.
So yeah, right now the canon in the universe and the cartoons and I'm not a fan of this canon personally. Is that like when there's a cataclysmic event, like a portal opens to the ghost dimension, right? Everything floods through. And then once you stop that cataclysm event, the door closes. And so, like, if you follow the movies and the cartoon, that's why stuff slows down until there's another cataclysmic event. Because the portal dimension of the ghost world is sealed, so nothing's coming through. So once you have a set amount of ghosts that escape and demons that escape into our world, once they're gone until another event happens and the portal opens. And they did that in Extreme Ghostbusters. That was the opening to Extreme Ghostbusters. Was like there was no more ghosts left, and then this gate to the portal just opens and everything floods out again. So it resets, and I could see why they want to do that, because the whole point of Ghostbusters 2 is that like people don't think it's real, like in the world. They're like, oh, it's fake, it's staged, fake news, right? It's all fake news. Like it was all smoke and mirrors. It's all media lying to you, and like because you never question it. Even the EPA in the first movie tries to shut them down because he thinks it's fake. He thinks that they're intoxicating or drugging people to seeing ghosts. So it always has that like kind of subplot going on with the world. Yeah. Like, is this real? Is this not real? People who do believe, who don't believe. Like, even though like there was factual evidence in this world that millions of people saw, 20 years later, they think it's fake,
And it kind of works for Afterlife in the way that they set it up, because I actually rewatched it the other day. The way that Paul Rudd kind of presents it to Phoebe and podcast, in that like in the scene where we kind of get the first like in character real reveal of like, oh yeah, this is set in the Ghostbusters universe, is that thing of Paul Rudd showing them the footage from you didn't hear about New York in the 80s? It was like The Walking Dead out there, and they kind of touch on that, and I do appreciate that. Like it kind of gives the implication of like, oh yeah, not everybody believes, but like Paul Rudd, his character Grooverson, totally believed. He was totally into it. he thought it was real. He totally was like, yeah, no, that was a thing that happened. So it seems like it was presented more as a divisive thing, almost like it's, are you an atheist? Right?
That's right. Yo, you know what I would like to see? So, and I don't want this to have to come at the expense of like Disney owning this IP, but I would love to see like more theme parks. Now, as I'm on Google right now, I'm actually Googling if there are like Ghostbuster theme park attractions. And there is one pretty big one in Hong Kong that is happening or has already happened. But I would love to be fully immersed into a world like that. And like, the worlds and the attractions inside of the theme park don't have to necessarily be canon, but it'd be awesome to see people, dress up in some of the ghost costumes, have people, acting as the cast members from all of the films, all four films, right? The first original two, 2016, and this most recent one. Like, I think that'd be really cool. I'm a big theme park guy, if you haven't noticed.
What's
Like, I would love
funny,
to see that.
Rod, is they did that. They have done that. They did that in the 80s to
Yeah.
the 95 in Universal Orlando. I'll see if I can pull it up on the stream for you. Let me see if I can pull it up. But I'll let Chris tell you all about it.
Oh boy. So there's the old school Universal Ghostbusters street show, right? Actually, I was going to mention, Rod, if you feel like taking a trip to Germany, there's Hyde Park in Germany that has a full-on Ghostbusters roller coaster with like a whole like anteroom lobby section where you walk through the modified RV that they use in the comic book, which is actually pretty cool.
I'm gonna put this on. I found it. I'm gonna put it on the screen for Rod, so you can see what it is. Like, this was 92 in Universal Studios Orlando.
Right. So way back in the day, they had the street show where they would drive the Ecto-1 around the theme park lot. They'd have a couple of actors in the flight suits with the proton packs on. A kind of a proton pack on. It's different. Anyways, they would have actors with proton packs on, and they would go and interact with the actor who was playing Beetlejuice in the street show, right? And they even had, I think they had a stage show for a little while too before that, right?
Yeah, that's what I have on this. You can't see it because
That's what you're thinking of, right?
Chris is on. He's on his phone, but you can see it, Rod. This was the live action show in Universal Orlando that they had, and it was about 11 minutes long. But it's everything you just described that you wanted that they had, but you were just too young to even go there. They shut it down, maybe too.
Yeah, I was still in the belly at this time.
You were a gleam of your what did they say? The gleam in your father's eye at that point.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I was.
But that's the weirdest thing about the franchise. I mean, that's the weirdest thing about this franchise is that like it kind of faded off for a while. Like, it didn't have this, like, for some reason, and I can't even explain why, it didn't have the staying power of like Star Wars or Transformers, or I think He-Man's the same way. He-Man kind of came and went, and then like it was just done. Like that was it.
Well, we were, I think it's more of a matter of kind of being in limbo, honestly. If Sony didn't acquire the rights to Ghostbusters until what, like 2008 or something? Like, it was way, way later that Sony actually got the rights to the franchise.
They bought Columbia Pictures, I think, at some point, and that's when they got it. Because Columbia Pictures was owned by,
And Columbia had no interest in doing anything with it. And the only person who really did have any interest in doing anything with it at the time was Dan Aykroyd. So nothing really happened until Sony came along, bought Columbia. Now they have this franchise, and they're going through their properties, going, okay, what do we have that is an evergreen franchise? And that is their term. That is the term that they use to refer to us. I don't know why. I know exactly why.
These things they come in waves. I mean, like a good example now is like X-Men was one of the biggest IP properties in the early 90s. Like, it was huge. I mean, they made movies about it, there were toys about it, there were several cartoons about, the X-Men, and like they got their time in the light, and like Avengers wasn't mentioned at all. Now we're in the complete opposite era where like Avengers gets to be popular for 20 years and X-Men are nowhere to be seen. There's no cartoon shows. I think the comic line is severely limited. and there's no movies with them. And it's not just a rights thing. I think it's because like it's people want to see Avengers. Like that's what they want to see. They don't want to see X-Men. They want to see Avengers right now.
I almost wonder if it. I mean, I think it largely is the rights thing, though, because it's like if Fox doesn't want to play ball, like they're not going to play ball, and that's it. Like when you have the that franchise kind of subdivided up amongst different properties and all sold off into different studios and stuff, it definitely complicates the process. I don't know.
Well, like I've told this to Denny too. Like there was some systematic destruction going on with my X-Men when Iron Man started to become popular, and like when Disney bought Marvel, the comics, they killed all the books. Like they realized that Fox wasn't going to play ball. They wanted too much money. They didn't want any competition, so they just destroyed all my X-Men books I was reading. And one day I walked into the comic store. I'm like, "Where are my books?" She's like, "Oh, they canceled them all, but like these two." And I'm like, "What?" I was reading like 20 books. They canceled all 18? Yeah, it's because they didn't want to have to deal with competition. And even now, like, I mean, now that they have the rights to X-Men, it's still been, what, since the Fox acquisition, like 3 or 4 years, and we haven't seen a single X-Men or mutant in any of the MCU films? Like,
yeah, we haven't seen... Well, I mean, I guess we technically seen Professor X show up in the new Doctor Strange film, but yeah, like, in terms of, like, what should be seen, just according to the comic books, because a lot of those characters in the Avengers universe are technically mutants. Yeah, they're kind of dragging their feet on that, which is horrible. I hope, that, Ghostbusters as a franchise never goes down that rabbit hole. Like I know that there's only so many films, but I like the fact that there aren't a lot of films, like they kind of just leave a lot to be desired in terms of like where the franchise can go. And I think with that type of thinking and marketing, it allows the fans to really just kind of hold on to it and just never let it go, as opposed to like the nonstop, hey, here's this film from your favorite superhero guy, and then he died, and now here's the next guy, then he died now, and it just never stops. Like here, like I got a sense of nostalgia at the end of Afterlife. I was like, oh, they really did that. They really did it. Like I was like, you know what? I like this.
There are your Ghostbuster costumes on screen. Rod, if you want to look, there are the Ghostbuster costumes on screen right now if you want to watch the
Yeah, I see. I got the stream next to me. This is amazing.
It's so cool bad. Shit. Yeah, it's so bad. But no, it's funny too because like in that from 1984 till now, I mean you can count it on 2 fingers. We've had 4 live action movies and 2 animated series. Like not counting specials and like events, but like we've had 6 things. We've I think in this last year we've gotten 14 Marvel movies. Like this is so much. Like it's almost too much. Like it's this franchise has given time to breathe. And like I don't know, like maybe it would be bad if they systematically made 14 Ghostbusters movies, spin-offs, TV shows in a year. Like I don't know, it might be overload. Too much Ghostbusters,
I'm kind of inclined to agree, and also sort of having this slow burn lead up to Firehouse kind of it gives the actors that some people who were critical of Afterlife thought were too young to age up into their roles a little bit. B, it gives fans like us time to sort of sit here and salivate for a while. Like, ooh, got something new coming down the pipe. And then it also kind of gives some breathing room for like character exploration and stuff where like, in the meantime, we know we're getting a new comic book series. There's a brand new comic book series coming from Dark Horse. We don't know who the creative team is behind it. I would not be surprised if that book spent some time exploring what Winston did or where he's at now after Afterlife and trying to build up the franchise or build up the business again, kind of like Spirits Unleashed touches on.
Yeah, and like Scarlet Web says, like Power Rangers and TMT have been also rinsed and reused so many times. That's a really good example when something starts getting out of trend. So, example, like Power Rangers, the first 2 seasons are like all about dinosaurs, right? And then like they realize there's like some kind of graphic somewhere. People are looking at trends like for kids and how the toys that they're into, and they're like, oh wait, dinosaurs are going down. Oh, it's ninjas now. Okay, we're gonna make Power Rangers into ninjas. And then when the ninja starts going down on the scale, they're like, okay, now they're going to be cars. And then when the cars start going down, they're going to be space fighters. And it just keeps changing the trend. But like those, I think Power Rangers is a good and bad example because that's all about following trends. And like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is all about just them getting dragged through the mud and trying to find their identity with a different generation. Because you have the 80s Turtles, then you have the 90s badass Turtles, then you have like this weird in-between movie period where they didn't know what they were, and then now you have the 3D animation turtles, and so like it keeps changing for generations, which is interesting. Where Ghostbusters has pretty much done this, like it's really hasn't changed much, I'd say.
No, I think as the movies have come out, the way that they've been themed has changed a little bit. Like I touched on before, like the original is very much a horror comedy, but if you watch two, it is not really a horror comedy. It is much more of a comedy with some supernatural elements going on. So there's like some slight shifting of the theme that happens over time, and some of that has to do with making it more family friendly, right? But for the most part, they really do stick with like the basic premise, the basic ideas, like the idea of using a proton pack to weaken and trap a ghost, and then stick it in a box. Like that basic concept, right? Like that's pretty much present through every form Ghostbusters takes, really, no matter what media it's in or what kind of story is being told.
Is Scooby-Doo and Ghostbusters, Rod? That's what you want? It would make sense. I don't think they ever did it. I think Scooby-Doo had fallen out of trend at that point, because I remember a pup named Scooby-Doo, and that show was great, but that was the last thing I remember before James Gunn made the movie.
I see the way Scooby-Doo is getting treated. They are turning into I think they're getting like a live action series, something a little bit more adult themed. And I'm like, I do like Scooby-Doo for a lot of the same reasons why I like Ghostbusters, but I'm like, how did these two franchises not cross over? Like Scooby-Doo met Johnny Bravo and the Harlem Globetrotters and Batman and all these cool people. But I'm like, the one that makes the most sense is Scooby-Doo and the Ghostbusters. Like just busting spooky shit for an hour or two. Oh man.
I actually might have an answer to this. It's because there was never the original series up until Pup Named Scooby-Doo. There was no real supernatural into these shows, and they probably would end up killing somebody because they were in a costume, and they'd just fry the hell out of them. They'd be like, "Uh-oh, I thought he was a ghost, and he's just dead." Like that's probably why they didn't do a crossover.
They're like, he is now.
They're always pulling the mask off at all the end of the episodes. Oh boy, it was Old Man Wilkins the whole time.
Right. And if you go back and watch old episodes of real Ghostbusters, it's like most episodes, the plot is Egon explains why they can't catch the ghost, creates some weird technology, they shoot it with proton packs. That's it. That's the plot of almost every episode. There's obviously there's a lot more detail to it than that episode by episode. But if you're boiling it down to just basic premise, like it's pretty much what happens in every episode. Like even the one where they fight Cthulhu.
That's true.
It's kid show logic, right? Power Rangers are the same thing. Like, we have to attack it one at a time with the Zords. Oh no, we failed. Okay, let's combine. Oh, now we won. It's always the thing. Why don't you just combine in the beginning? No, you gotta attack one at a time. First, and then fail, and then you combine. I was like, as a kid, like, why don't the Power Rangers just open with the sword move? Why do they have to drag out the fight for 10 minutes? Just open with that, and then be done with it, and then be home time for dinner, like...
Yo, so I gotta know your guys' like favorite moment from the Ghostbusters franchise. I have one, and mine is pretty just like in your face. But I don't have like a super deep cut one, because my knowledge of Ghostbusters is, very surface level for the most part. Like I'm just an enjoyer of the franchise. Like I don't do like Marvel and DC deep dives like how you guys do on Ghostbusters. But what are your guys' favorite moments? And then I'll share mine.
Oh man. Listen, you smell something? I don't know why, but the introduction in the very first movie, the library scene, where they don't have any of the gear, they just have the PKE meter, and Ray's enthusiasm in that scene is probably what like one of the things that first sold like. So I love Ray. He's Dan Aykroyd is sort of like my Ghostbuster spirit animal. So like, the silliness of that scene, even that line, listen, you smell something? It's like, how am I supposed to listen for a smell, Ray? What is going on? I mean, like, yeah, that I think is probably the thing that caught me is that very first scene in the first Ghostbusters is the library.
I mean, for me,
Yeah.
I don't like it's not like it's hard to narrow down one thing because like I don't even think Sony or writers or Dan know exactly what checkbox you have to make to have Ghostbusters movie, because it's so many elements like mashed together that on paper shouldn't work, but they do. I mean, I guess for me, it's like the real Ghostbusters had this like pre-recorded soundtrack that where they like paid some musician, I forget who he was, but they paid him to make like 10 tracks. Like there's 10 loopable tracks that you could put at any given time, and then you just swap them into the show. And I loved that music. That music's yeah, no, not this, the lyrical songs, the actual soundtrack.
Oh, like the
Oh,
score.
oh,
The score. So like they
the
had, and
music
like
bit.
to this day, it still hasn't been released. There've been some like fan remixes and like people who have tried to isolate sound effects to make this track, but like all those that music just sticks out with me so much. Like it just resonates. I hear that music instantly, and it's just it's Ghostbusters to me, and not just the theme song, like everything in that cartoon. I think that's what I like resonate the most. I just remember that the most. Just good music.
Yeah. Well, and they did a good job of kind of replicating Elmer Bernstein's style from the original film too. Which is that's actually something that stood out to me that Ilphonic has done with Spirits Unleashed quite a bit is they're not using any copyrighted stuff from Elmer Bernstein, but they are very much like trying to sound like him.
They use the same instruments.
And
Yeah.
the same instrumentality, a lot of the same kind of oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not a music guy. Yeah, huh?
They use like a theremin. I know that's one of the instruments they used, right? The theremin.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of similar sounds, a lot of similar, just the way that it's written is very, very similar, without actually completely copying. And it's just a good job of being like really reminiscent, not making you think of it without actually being it.
Scarlet Wolf. They made Ecto Slime. They made it, and I remember that because it wasn't allowed in the house. That's how I remember that. Like anything that was could stick to carpet or the sofa was not allowed in the house at all. We weren't allowed to buy it. And so like they actually did make Ecto Slime. They actually re-released it recently with the Afterlife thing. I don't know if you can still get it, but they had a whole line of ectoplasm in different colors, green, purple, blue, that you could buy with these ghost things. So they actually did make it. It might have been a Walmart exclusive. That's why you never saw it.
Oh,
But
I had no idea that happened. I'm really glad too that we brought up the topic of music with Ghostbusters. I think more than anything, the music, especially for the first film, is kind of like the unsung hero. I mean, of course, the premise is that we dress up, we bust ghosts, and of course, everybody loves their props. But I think another key ingredient, that really made this franchise stick was, that song, and especially again in the '80s, where like I think Back to the Future has like some sort of motif that they consistently use throughout the films, and of course we all know the Terminator.
The chimes, the chimes, and then
yeah. But like I love the ghost, like it's an actual song. Like I don't think any other film franchise did that at the time. Like this song was like on the radio, like kids were singing this song like it was like a Disney song.
And I think there's like some great interview stuff with Ray Parker Jr. where he even talks about like in the process of writing the lyrics, he like wanted to write it like a commercial jingle for a business because that was that's what it's supposed to be, kind of like it's like that song can exist in universe and out of universe, which is kind of what's cool about the way it's written, right? Like it, you could totally see them cutting one of their commercials using that song.
Yes.
One of the things I always ask myself is how much did Ray Parker make off that song from when he made it till today? Like it's got to be in the millions of dollars.
Hold on. I'm gonna look it up.
How much he gets? If this is say he gets a quarter of a single time it's played on the radio, or a quarter of a single time it's used on Pandora, and then like of course the licensing rights for movies and television. Like he's got to have made a shit ton of money off of it.
Well, sure, but first you have to answer how much he owed Huey Lewis for it too. So
that is true.
It says Ray claims he was entitled to 75% of the gross receipts produced by the song.
That's so much money.
Oh my! Wait a minute. I'm seeing a couple different stories because he has a net worth of about $10 million, and then there's another site that actually breaks down his income per year. I don't know if this is just from his music off to the side, or the actual song itself, because it's showing here, like Chris said, there's a little bit of a legality issue with the song, right?
Yeah, like the
Yeah,
music rights are weird with the Ghostbuster films, particularly.
no, specifically, he got sued by Huey Lewis immediately after the release of the song because of how close the song is to "I Want a New Drug."
Oh, what?
Yep, yep. It is very similar. And I've heard rumors about like that they used Huey Lewis to cut the edit to do editing cuts, and that's why the Ghostbusters theme song is written so similarly. But yeah, I don't know how much veracity there is to that. So
It was also like a different time period. Like there wasn't, I don't want to say there wasn't hindsight, but like IP is more invaluable than ever now. And like, so people didn't really understand, like, that's why Elmer Bernstein's music is not in a lot of stuff, because I think his estate owns the rights. And at that given time, like now you would be paid a flat fee and whatever company would just own your rights. Basically, that's it. Like that's it. You don't own your rights to your own music. Like that's how everything's written now, basically. But back in the 80s and 70s, like if you wrote something, it was yours and you would license it out to the studio. So like yeah, so that's why like Elmer Bernstein's music is probably not in the Ghostbusters Unleashed game, and only like one of his themes is used in the Ghostbusters video game because they had to pay the estate, and you never like they're never transparent about how much it costs because you have to sign NDAs up the ass, but like it's usually pretty greedy. You know, they probably want a huge upfront cost and a percentage of sales or whatever to use a music track. You know what I mean? So that was made 35 years ago by, to the great grandson. You know what I mean? Like, so people get greedy, and it's that sucks. But it was different back then. Like a lot, which is cool. Like the artists own their own rights, but at the same time, it gets convoluted when you want to put it in anything else after they pass on, because it takes 75 years for fair use to take effect now. So
That's true. And I think too, like looking at some of like even some of the Disney stuff too, like, in a very similar fashion. If I'm not mistaken, the young man who played young Simba's voice, his mom originally counter offered Disney because Disney just wanted to give them like a couple $1,000,000 and then call it good. But she was like, well, you know, depending on how we manage this, we'll burn through this money. Like, why don't we just do a residual check of a couple $1,000s a month for the rest of his life or something like that? And I would imagine, like, at least me personally, that's the play I would have made for this song. Because looking at the Ghostbusters franchise, and then of course the actors in the film, like all these guys are at the top of their class and are only getting bigger. Like, I was like, yo, give me the residual check, okay? Don't try to just write me off. I need to be paid every month for this because the music is a huge component of why the movie is so popular the way it is.
it's a risk reward system, and a lot of like Rod, you'll like I'll give you a really good example. Like, say someone's like, we want you to pay to cover the Smash event. We can either pay you $5,000 or you can have 15% of the ticket admission price of people who come. So like that's like a and let's say you don't know how big the event's going to be, like you've never heard of it, right? It's not Evo. It's something like different. So you have to weigh that. Be like, well, I could get 5,000 if I go, or I could potentially get more if a lot of people show up. But you could get screwed the opposite way, right? Like you could like, damn, I wish I would have taken the 5,000, or damn, I wish I would have taken the 15% ticket sale, commission. And like nowadays, like big actors like The Rock and Chris Pine, they get both. Like they'll get a flat rate and percentage, but like usually some people in between have to pick like one or the other, like either a salary or like residuals or points, or whatever they call them, points, I guess, in the business, back points. But so yeah, it's difficult to weigh that decision. That's Jonathan Taylor Thomas's mom, who I believe is also his agent. Like, yeah, was smart because Lion King made a shit ton of money in the long run.
Well, and I think there is definitely value to like, especially when you're talking about like music artists. So we touched on this earlier where, we were out in an event a couple of weeks ago and we had all these, parents taking pictures of us with their kids telling us, oh, they love Ghostbusters, but they haven't seen the movie yet. They know Ghostbusters from the song. That's how they know it. It's slapped on every Kids Bop album ever. Like it's out there. And some of that, I kind of showed off the logo. Some of that is brand recognition. The logo is so iconic and is still one of the most recognized brand logos in the world. But some of that is just, it's a catchy song that gets, is appropriate for kids. And kids kind of like it. And it just works. And then on top of that, like by keeping Ray Parker Jr. paid throughout all these years, we get stuff like, Greg, you might be able to pull up a link to this. At FanFest, there was a 20-minute live performance of just the original Ghostbusters song by Ray Parker Jr. Says, let that sink in. He did a 20-minute long variation of just the original theme.
Well,
Yeah,
when you're paid, Tony was like, well, if we're paying you $1 million, we get you for 20 minutes, and you're gonna perform the whole 20 minutes, sir.
And he was there at FanFest all day too. Like, he was there for the fans specifically, because he's still getting paid to be a part of the franchise. So he's got the incentive to be there, you know. And I think there's something to be said about that.
I mean, I hope that's the case, because the thing is, I'm going to pull it up on the stream right now, because like some of these things, like they are contractually obligated to go, or they will be paid to go, and they, you know, that's fine. Like, it's called an appearance fee. It's real. But like, you know, the people who show up that aren't contractually obligated to be there, like I don't think Jason Reitman was contracted obligated to be certain places, you know, like, but they just go, like, that's when it really shines. But you never know, because no one's transparent about it ever. Because they didn't want you to shatter the illusion, like the only reason Ivan Reitman was there is because he was paid $175,000. You know what I mean? Like, because that's the thing they wanted. They wanted to seem like it's organic and real, and you just never know. I hope that's the case. I hope Ray Parker's like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll show up and do a concert. Why the fuck not? You know what I mean? Like, that's what you want to hope for, but you just never know.
Well, the Jason Reitman example is a good example of that too. Like, he absolutely was there for goodwill. He wasn't being paid to be there. You know, Greg, you've heard this story before. When I attended FanFest, my ticket included a photo op with Ivan and Jason, but they were running late, like 20 or 30 minutes late, and I got stuck in line with a bunch of other Ghostbusters, and that was a fun time hanging out with other people. I got to meet Chris Stewart from Proton Charging that I keep mentioning. He's a big Ghosthead, you know, big pillar of the Ghosthead community for years now. But, you know, we're stuck out in the heat. It's June in LA. I'm wearing a 30-pound backpack and a Nomex flight suit, like, which Nomex does not breathe. So it was pretty uncomfortable. And when he did get there, Jason made a point to go down the line and personally shake the hand and apologize to every single fan that they left waiting. Like that was such a class act move on his part. He did not have to do that. They weren't paying him to do it. He did that because that was the right thing, and he had respect for the fans. And you know, like that was the moment that I was really sold on Afterlife, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. And honestly, that's how it should be. I mean, and I say that, of course, you know, within reason, because I know that actors or people who work behind the scenes or, you know, in front of the camera, wherever their position is, they are still people. They get irritated, they get tired as well. But I still think that, and I hate to use the word owe, but I still think a lot of these people owe it to their fans, especially for a franchise as prolific as, you know, the Ghostbusters franchise that has withstood the test of time in a way that not a lot of franchises could from the 80s till now. But there's a lot of, like, again, I hate to stress this more, but there's a lot of just like one-off films that, like, you got one or two of them you never heard of. Like, you got The Fly and you got The Fly 2, which both good films. You know, everybody loves Jeff Goldblum. And then, like, nothing.
What's the one where the guy comes out of the toilet? He's like a monster that comes out of the toilet. There's that one.
Yeah, there's
Ghoulies, I think it's called. Yeah, like, it's just Rod's right. There are a lot of weird ones.
Like, it's just it's insane. And I think, you know, again, Ghostbusters has changed a lot of people's lives in a lot of ways. And to have a franchise transcend 30, almost 40 years, I think shaking hands with these people is not a big ask, you know.
And we've seen that before with Dan. Like, Dan has said in multiple interviews, like the only reason I'm here and I got to do the things I wanted to do afterwards was because of the success of the fans of the first film. But then you have people like Bill Murray, who kind of snickered at it for years and years. And even in the 2009 video game where he voiced it, he sounds bored and uninterested. So, like, I think it's just depending on the level you're at that time. Because people don't realize this, but Bill Murray was a sex icon in the 80s. Like, he was the sexiest man alive. Like, he was huge. He felt like he was untouchable. There's actually a video that resurfaced that emphasizes this. I don't know if you've seen the Gina Davis video yet, Rod, but he's on a talk show with Arsenio Hall with Gina Davis, and he's being very inappropriate. because like he's on top of the world. He can do anything he wants. He's getting paid whatever he wants, gets to do whatever he wants, gets that celebrity bullshit that they get away with everything, you know? And like, yeah, it's just a different level. Dan Aykroyd's always been, at least to me, like I felt he's very down to earth. Even though he does make millions of dollars, like he's been very relatable still, you know? He's a writer, he's an actor, he has like interesting hobbies. You know, he's not just a celebrity, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to kind of get beside yourself a little bit when you are making that much money. And I'll be honest, there are just some films that, without the franchise, there'd be no you. And I don't want either side to throw that in each other's face, but Ghostbusters, man, come on. Like, everybody who's in that film owes a lot of where they're at today to that franchise. That is a banging ass IP, and anybody would be lucky to be in that.
Star Wars is the same way. Like Mark Hamill, this is another example. Like Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford have two completely different viewpoints on Star Wars. Two completely different viewpoints. Like Harrison Ford won't be caught dead at a signing. Like he wouldn't be caught dead. Maybe now, but like not in the 80s and 90s. Not dead. He would not be anywhere near that damn franchise. He hated that franchise. And Mark has gone on record to say that he's hated the franchise. Like they just had different outlooks. Where Mark Hamill, I've met him a couple times. He's an awesome, amazing person. Like you couldn't ask for a better guy who eats up the Star Wars and all the nerdum fandom and the Joker and the Batman. He loves all that stuff. And Harrison Ford is like the exact opposite. He hates all of it. But Harrison Ford's more of like he likes the craft, right? He wants to be taken seriously. He doesn't want to have like be affiliated with Han Solo the rest of his life, which is unfortunate because that's what it is. He's either Han Solo or Indiana Jones. Sorry, like that's what he is, and he hates accepting that fact. But we're like Mark Hamill has accepted. Hey, I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm the Joker. I'm whomever. You know, I'm the trickster. It doesn't matter. Like it's just two different viewpoints from two different people when they become popular or famous.
Oh, yeah. Great. Now I want Mark Hamill to make a cameo in the new Ghostbusters.
He's awesome. He's an awesome dude. Like he's a great guy.
I need to know something. I've never been to like New York Comic Con, and like my convention game is pretty booty for this year. 2023, I got some projects where I want to go to more cons and conventions for this type of talk here. What is the Ghostbuster scene like? I know like depending on like the fandom and like however many people are in it, like they'll get together, cosplay, do a big shoot, do a big meetup, whatever. I'd imagine the Ghostbusters one has to be monstrous.
It can be. It depends on the con. We don't have nearly as much of a lot of West Coast ghost heads are spread out enough that it's a lot harder for all of us to converge at a single convention at any given point of the year. As opposed to out on the East Coast in Atlanta, they have Dragon Con every year. One of the biggest comic conventions. Takes place over a full 5-7 day week. It's it's set up between these 4 downtown hotels that are all connected by sky bridges. So you could just walk with a drink in your hand from every part of the con to every other part of the con. And it's also the place where we have the largest annual gathering of Ghostbusters in one place, the PKE Surge. So the PKE Surge has been happening for 10, 15 years now. It's been going for quite a while.
Wow.
But a lot of that has to do with how much tighter the East Coast is, in terms of proximity to Georgia, even. It's a lot easier for a lot of the East Coast guys to make it to Dragon Con for the week than it is for, everybody from up in Washington and Oregon to come down to California, and everybody from Southern California to come up to the Bay Area, for everybody to show up in San Jose for
what's funny? I've never been to Dragon Con before, but I have heard about how intense the meetups are. Now, I've went to MomoCon once, and I did see a lot of people actually in Star Wars like get-ups, or not Star Wars, excuse me, Ghostbusters get-ups. But it sounds like now I have to go to Dragon Con. I gotta hit Dragon Con. Like that's the one. Like MomoCon feels a little bit more video game related. Dragon Con seems like, oh, this is about the fandom first and everything second.
Absolutely.
It's also like we don't have like Chris mentioned, there's a PKA Surge, which is like a meetup, but it's part of a con. Like there is no Ghostbuster Con, right? Is there, Chris? There's no official like Ghostbuster Con Fan Fest was like a one-time thing for a 30th anniversary, but that was it.
The closest that we've gotten is the UK folks. Ghostbusters of Glasgow actually did Ectofest, I think 2 years or last year, I can't recall off the top of my head, but there was an international con that was specifically for Ghostbusters called Ectofest.
I'm looking it up.
But that was done in the UK, so it was like if you weren't in Europe, kind of shit out of luck.
Also, too, Rod, like it sucks as someone. I'm fairly new to this hobby. Chris has been educating me the last 3 years. Chris, holy shit, it's a long time.
Something like that.
But like traveling with your proton pack is nerve wracking because not only have you crafted this over a period of like, in Chris's case, like several years and honed it and made it perfect. They're also freaking expensive. Like just getting the parts alone can just building one from scratch can cost you easily $900, and that's like a low key one. Yeah, I mean like I commissioned mine for what was it? 12 was $1,100, Chris? I believe mine was $1,100. It was like $1,100 or $1,200 to commission this one.
Yeah,
and like so when you take in something that big, unless you have like a custom fitted trunk, like you're buying a seat for it. You're not going to ship it. You're going to buy a seat on the airplane and travel with you. So then it just adds more to the cost of going to an event with your gear, you know? So it's nerve-wracking.
I literally met a dude at FanFest who flew from Virginia to California, and that's what he did. Was he took his proton pack as a carry-on. I don't know how he got it through security, but he did it.
I mean, look, you bump into a guy and he has a proton pack, don't ask any questions.
Yeah, right.
He knows stuff you don't. Like, just right this way, sir. Come right through.
He has a false knowledge that is strange and distant to you.
Mm-hmm.
It really is that like iconic thing. Like everyone can see that and know exactly. Even if you've never seen the movie, you know what it is. Like because you just know.
I don't know. When I went to San Francisco Comic-Con back in, I want to say like 2017, at the check-in line, I actually had SFPD bring a dog over to sniff me, which was a surprise. So, you know, it's by on some people, but it is pretty rare that people don't at least recognize, like, oh, that's a Ghostbusters thing.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine trying to bring this to an airport because they'd probably have me. Chris, have you ever brought it to an airport? You've never brought it to an airport. You drove to FanFest. They would make you open it because it's like semi-hollow inside, and you'd have to show them that there's nothing dangerous in there, like and how it works and everything like that. And like that's just too much for me. Like I was actually before I lost a little bit of my income, I was going to commission Garrett to ask him to see if he can make a trunk for me to fit it in because that's what you need. You need like a Pelican case that's cut to specific, and all these things have very like you can find these online. Chris said like have very specific measurements. They're all the same if they're all the same molds and cast, same size usually. And if you can get a foam, cut it in a foam insert, put it in the trunk, and then that's what you would ship, insured via FedEx or UPS. But even shipping the damn thing would weigh 20 pounds, you know, and it's going to cost you $200 to get it there and back. So it adds up to the cost. It's similar to like with cosplayers at like anime expos, Rod. I mean, you've seen those elaborate costumes. Those people have to ship those in pieces. It probably costs them hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to ship 12 different pieces to a convention, you know, that's this big, you know. They can't bring it with on the plane and it'll get trashed if they check it. So they got to make custom like luggage to put it all in.
Yeah. It's intense, man. That's one of the biggest reasons why like when it comes to certain fandoms, I have to watch from the sideline because I know me and I know like for instance, I bought like a jacket, like a Marvel jacket, like from the Loki TV show, and I immediately was like, when's the meetup? I need to meet all the other Lokis. I already know, like with Ghostbusters, I'm gonna get sucked right into that. So like, I got a couple T-shirts. I actually have a Ghostbusters hat back in Nebraska, but I don't have the full suit for this exact reason because I know, like, oh my god, I'm gonna be on the plane with the proton, everything. It's gonna be crazy.
Well, hey Rod, you know we can get you in touch with your local franchise. We might know some people.
You're right. You're in New York, right, Rod? That's where you're in.
Well, so right now I'm in New Jersey until November. Then I go back to Nebraska. So if you know anybody from Nebraska who's into the Ghostbusters, anything, point them my direction. I'll meet up with them.
There are franchises in every state. I promise you, there are in every state.
There's at least one in every state usually. Most of the time we're pretty regional. So there, you know, and California is a good example. I think we've got something like 8 or so different franchises around the state, just kind of depending on what part of the state you're in.
Yeah, we have.
Nebraska is probably a little bit more tightly knit.
Yeah, and in
Right.
California we have the SoCal group, we have the LA group, we have the Napa County Ghostbuster. I think which is one person, right? It's just Gavin.
Will's one of us.
Yeah, okay. So we have the NorCal Ghostbusters, which is us. Then there's the San Francisco Ghostbusters, and there's the LA Ghostbusters, and I think there's even a Southern California division, like a generic Southern California Ghostbuster one.
So there's like 3 or 4 different groups down
Yeah.
in LA. There's like Orange County,
San
San
Diego.
Diego, Hollywood, LA. I think there's another one that I actually saw pop up on social media recently.
There's a lot.
That was working with Orange County. There's Sacramento, who actually, I was just talking to Sacramento the other day because we're going to be doing an event with them in December. They've actually just expanded, so they actually have Sacramento plus the Terror Dog Squad, is what they call it. So they've got a subgroup. Then there's Bay Area Ghostbusters, and then there's NorCal Ghostbusters us.
That's us.
And I think out of all of the groups, I think we probably cover the largest span of area, but that's more because we're in the rural part of the state than anything.
And ironically, we're one of the smallest, which is funny. We cover the biggest area, and we're the smallest.
Yep.
We're basically 3 active members and a couple other side members that are still involved. They just don't do the events because they live so far away. But the cool thing about the franchisees is like we all have our own little patches. And all of them are designed usually by someone in the franchise. This was designed by Jacob. Is it Henderson? Is that his last name?
Yep.
Yeah, you
Jacob
designed
Henderson.
this one, and it's a really simplistic design. It's just the Ghostbuster logo with our branch and then trees.
I want a patch.
Right?
We can get you a patch. I think we can get you some
Rod.
patches and stickers.
But like all of
I'll
us
be
have
an
different
honorary
ones,
Ghostbuster.
which is super
Wait,
fun.
what do you say?
Yeah, we all have like even though we're all Ghostbusters, we all have like our own identity based on like our patch, which is kind of fun because all the patches have different designs, like depending on I think the Hollywood Ghostbusters is like he has sunglasses on and it's like a sunset behind him, I believe. Like so, like they all like look a little bit differently.
That's LA.
LA, excuse me.
They incorporate the Hollywood Walk of Fame star. So instead of the red cross at it, it's the Walk of Fame star.
I'm jealous.
You want a patch? We'll get you a patch, Rod. Just hit me up on Slack. I'll get you a patch.
All
You
right.
want a
I want
patch?
a patch.
Don't worry, we'll
Also,
get you-
I didn't get a chance to share my my favorite moment.
Yeah, share your favorite moment.
So my favorite moment is at the end of Afterlife, all right, when Mr. Man comes back as a ghost. No words, not a word spoken. Just good acting. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's CGI, but good eye contact, body language. Facial gestures. Like I was like, okay, this is hitting somewhere for me. This is how you bring a guy back, but then you don't really bring him back. Like you don't ruin the moment. Like I love that. That was so good.
And that could have been done.
That scene still gets me to tear up.
Yeah, and that could have been done catastrophically bad if they were not. Like even that was a risk. Like, that was such a high risk for them. Like they're like, what do we do? How do we handle this? Are people going to be upset? Are people going to laugh? Are people going to cry? Like it's the nerve wrackiness of that stuff could be handled terribly. I mean, just look at what they did in The Last Jedi with Carrie Fisher. You know what I mean? Like it's scary when you do stuff like that when the actor's gone, or it can turn out to have terrible results.
When you give a fan favorite character that kind of on-screen farewell, right? And you know what you might actually appreciate about that particular scene, Rod, a little bit of behind the scenes from that. When they were filming that final sequence, the stand-in actor for Egon's ghost was Ivan Reitman.
Really?
Yeah. There's set photos of him with the flight suit that says Spangler and everything on.
That scene was just chef's kiss. Like I remember seeing it for the first time in the film, and I thought, no way. I had only ever felt like that one other time, and it's not Marvel related. Great. It was in Split. At the end of Split, they're playing the Unbreakable theme, and then Bruce Willis's character shows up because they have to fight in the third film. And I watched that film with my dad. Like I watched Ghostbusters with my mom, and I thought, Mom, you have to see this film for the end of the movie. And she, for the longest, kept saying, how are they going to do it? One of the guys isn't there anymore. They did the reboot, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we just have to go see it, and you'll understand when we get there. Like, just wait to the end. And that was just such a beautiful and somber moment. Like, it was a good way for that generational divide that I felt like kind of came in 2016 to kind of come back into the middle. Like, hey, this is why we're here. Like, This is just a franchise of things that we love that are trying their absolute best. They're paying attention. If they weren't paying attention, you wouldn't have gotten a moment like that in Afterlife. They would have just continued and carried on as if he wasn't ever there, you know?
Exactly. No, exactly. Or they would have, kept doing the little hints that we were getting throughout Afterlife, right? Of Phoebe following the PKE around, or playing chess against a ghost type of thing, where it's like we get these hints that he's there, he's kind of the spirit guide. We're gonna keep stringing him along and using him, and it's like, well, okay, but that's also like I guess that's a good way of keeping the character incorporated, but it also feels a little disrespectful to Harold Ramis. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he is past, and he was a big part of the very base. I touched on this earlier. Like, part of the real base DNA of the franchise, right, is that performance, Harold Ramis's performance. Just
Mhm.
not just Egon, but the way that he played Egon.
Yes. There is no recasting that, and not in a franchise like this that has lasted since the 80s. Like, it's very rare that you ever get recast. People want to see the original actors or something done in their likeness step back into the role, even for a moment. It's one of the reasons why Arnold Schwarzenegger will just not stop being a Terminator. Like, dude, you're the T-800. There's like the T-5000 that can evaporate and fly up, your brain and blow you up, and they keep sending you back. Like, we need better Terminators, but it's not the same with Ghostbusters. It's like, these are our guys, and it almost feels like a love letter or an answer back to, like, again, all the bad flack that 2016 got. Like, okay, here they are. They're here. All four of them are here. You didn't think we could do it, and we did it. So now what? And I think now they're rumoring a sequel for sometime
Yeah,
soon, right?
they've confirmed the sequel's going to be called. I think it's just. Is it a title or is it just working title, Chris? I think it's Project Firehouse.
Title. Firehouse is just the work title.
Okay.
Yeah, which is funny because Spirit Unleashed plays as a successor to that game, and if they're going in the same direction as Spirits Unleashed, which opens with the ending of Afterlife with Winston coming through the garage and cleaning up the firehouse, like that's how the game opens. So like if they go this direction where it's a bunch of new people in a firehouse and he has to figure out what they're gonna do with like Phoebe and Podcast, like I mean Podcast, I don't know if that kid has parents. I don't know where that dude lives. I'm convinced that he's an adult. But like yeah, I mean if that's where they're going with it, I'm excited.
Yeah, definitely. That opening cinematic in Spirits Unleashed, I think, really gave me the tinglies, because it does very much like kind of take that moment from the after credits scene where we've got Winston talking about being a Ghostbuster and bringing things back again and rebuilding, like, and we see him actually follow through with it.
Yeah, I'll play it on the stream for you, Rod, right now.
Yeah, please do. And as you're doing that, Chris, I gotta know, man. I know how serious again the Ghostbusters fandom is, and how well it resonates with you. And I've seen one piece of your merch back here. Then of course I see the suit. Are you hiding any other trinkets and doodads and thingamabobs from us?
Oh, I got a few things. I got a few things. I think I showed off my ghost trap earlier. This is a Ben of Kent 3D printed ghost trap that I've built completely myself from the kit. Added a bunch of real parts. Let me just flip that back. Added a bunch of real parts to it to make it look better, and well, it's really heavy. Which makes it hard to carry on a belt, as you would imagine. My personal favorite. So really, my favorite is the Proton Pack. I think that probably shows, but I'm such a Dan Aykroyd fanboy. I can't not show a little bit of love to the Ecto goggles.
Oh.
These are actually the Matty Collector reproduction Ecto goggles that were released back in, I want to say around 2005-ish, somewhere early 2000s, mid 2000s. That were only done for real limited series, real limited time. They did these. They did a PKE meter. They did a ghost trap. They did a neutrino wand.
What?
That's that as far as like buy it all at once, already done and one and done sort of thing,
Mhm.
that Mattel PKE meter is the best option on the market right now.
Really?
Like there's only one or two real, there's only one or two fan-made exceptions to that. I think Martin Bryce of Shapeforge Designs is one of them. But I haven't seen any, many others that you can buy fully functional with all the lights and the buttons, and it is perfectly accurate. Ghostbusters Hong Kong, Ghostbusters Hawaii. There were so many people from all over the world that came out for FanFest. It was absolutely stunning just to see the whole sea. Because imagine you've seen a convention crowd before. Imagine that whole crowd is wearing flight suits and proton packs.
Oh, that's so badass.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so badass. Oh,
That's what it was like.
But like it doesn't happen often. Like that, they did it for the 35th anniversary, and like that was it. Like that was the only time they did it, and they don't. It's not like it's not like a once a year occurrence, which blows. And then like it was funny because when Afterlife was being prepped to come out, Shaq News was actually going to get involved. Like I mean, because Chris had forwarded the email to me about like Sony reaching out to do like some press stuff, and I was like, wait, let me handle this. So I'm like, hey, like I actually work for a journalism site. Like we can give you guys some coverage. Like how can we work this? Can we do interviews? Do you want us to do like what can we do to help this out? And then in the middle of our conversation, COVID hit, so everything got scrapped. So it was 2019. That sucked. That sucked really bad. We were in talks with them for like the Sony rep for like a couple months. Like it was just like, oh, and then it just crashed. Like everything got canceled.
And then they did end up inviting franchises down for the Hollywood premiere when it happened last year. We didn't get the invite.
We didn't get an invite. We're just not big enough. That's the problem. We're just too small.
Well, where does FanFest rank versus Ectofest? Because you said Ectofest was the one in the UK, and as you guys are talking, I've been reading into this. Ectofest seems like a really big ass deal too, but it seems like FanFest, when it comes to just the overall attendance of people in the Ghostbusters, has everything else eclipsed.
Kind of, yeah. It really did, mostly because of celebrity presence. FanFest was done pretty much directly with Sony and Ghost Corps, so they were able to do things like, hey, Joe Majek from the Real Ghostbusters, come on out. Or I'm spacing on his name, the voice actor who played Egon in the Real Ghostbusters, Philip LaMarche. He was there. Just because Sony had the money, they have the resources, they have the contact info, they can do those sorts of things where they can get a lot more of those fan favorite celebrities involved.
And like FanFest was like a one-time thing, 35th anniversary thing, where like the other one happens every year, I believe, right, Chris? Or once in a while. It's definitely not once every 35 years.
Once. They've only done the one so far. They did the first one so far. I believe Glasgow Ghostbusters are talking about doing it again, but I haven't been talking to Tony. I need to hit up Tony. Sorry.
Chris is really tight with that circle. He talks to all the franchises. Like he knows a lot of them.
Yeah. So after I built my pack, I got really into like the internet community of proton pack building, and that kind of opened up a big door for me being like in touch with a lot of the international community.
I see.
Yeah. At this point, I think I have 2 or 3 people consulting with me on proton pack builds at the moment.
Yeah, because the thing about Chris, I hate putting him on the spot, but like Chris is a stickler for screen accurate stuff. So like if you have a screen accurate question about a prop or a device, like Chris is the person to ask that question. He will say, yeah, like, but you got this wrong, or you put this the wrong way, or this is the wrong color, or that's the wrong, like he's on it with that stuff. When it comes to screen accuracy, he's really, really good at it.
There are people in the community who have me beat. Dan Harshman of the Virginia Ghostbusters knows the screen accuracy details of every single proton pack and prop inside and out in a way that I never would. He also has a lot more expendable income than I do, so
well, that usually helps.
Well, we'll wrap up here. Rod, if you had any more questions, or Chad has any more questions, now's the time to ask before we got to sign off and get back to our day-to-day activities.
I personally think I got everything answered for me, and I think the only legitimate outcome for myself after this is now I need to dive even deeper into the Ghostbusters lore. I mean, again, just being a nerd, like, you just see the Ghostbusters and you just automatically gravitate towards it because it's a good franchise. The films are family friendly. Like they're always a good time. But now it's time for me to do like the Marvel deep dive, Greg. So I'm about to get real annoying here in the next one.
Oh, good God.
You've been messaging like, hey, did you know this thing? Did you know this? Did you know that?
Oh,
What they did to my
When you
Wrecking
get
Crew
to
boys,
it.
I'll never forgive them. I'll never ever forgive them. Anyway,
When you get to it, I absolutely recommend the IDW comic book series. It was amazing. It's ended now, but they did a bunch of great storytelling with it, including doing stuff where they crossed dimensions and brought the characters from Ghostbusters 2016 into the same setting as the original 1984 Ghostbusters. And it was great storytelling.
do they have it in a graphic novel, Chris?
I'm sorry?
Do they have it in the form of a graphic novel, or you can only buy the single issues?
So I believe they have, the last time I looked, they had omnibuses for the original volumes, and then it's trade paperbacks from there.
All right, beautiful. So you guys, thank you so much. Rod, thanks for co-hosting with me as usual. Thanks for all the questions. Chris, again, thank you for taking time out of your day. I know we do this a lot, which is awesome. So hopefully we'll do it more. For more like Ghostbuster stuff, we do have some content on Shack News as well as Shack News Games. We have a lot of with Chris and I. But yeah, until then, that was Retail Therapy episode 15. We're the best. We're the beautiful. We're the only Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
I'll see you guys later.